Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we are still at the start of the 2044 to 2045 offseason. We're going to spend our annual episode looking at our top prospects, some of the more interesting prospects around baseball, and some of our former players in this episode. And this will be our last episode for close to a week. So those of you who look for us on a regular basis, don't be alarmed if you don't see us again until Saturday or Sunday, February 10th or 11th, most likely. We're in a pretty good spot as far as our prospects. We just won our fourth World Series with the Buffalo Wings, as we've talked about in our last couple of episodes. And we have been investing very heavily in scouting and player development over the last several years, pretty much, since the playthrough began. Heavy investment in scouting and player development is something that I like to focus on. But this past year, with a $20 million scouting budget and a $40 million player development budget, was about as high as we've ever been in Buffalo. And it's definitely paid off, because when you look at our farm system, we now rank first in Major League Baseball. So given that we are a team that's coming off of a championship, and we've also got a great farm system, that puts us in a pretty good spot. And at this point, we've got 8 top 100 prospects. So certainly the trades we made last offseason that ended up landing us Jim Reichert were very helpful in getting to the number 1 ranking overall, because he's 4th in our system. But the other 7 top 100 prospects we have are all homegrown at this point. We talked about Reichert in our last episode. He split last year between AAA, AA in the majors, and when he was up in the majors, he hit .311 with a 132 WRC plus. The only question about Mr. Reichert is, where will he ultimately settle in our lineup? Will he be a right fielder, a left fielder, a first baseman, or a designated hitter? Any and all of those are possibilities for him, but expecting a lot of production from him over the next decade, and we've signed him to a long-term contract. Juan Toledo, who was an international free agent signing of ours almost 6 years ago in January of 2039, finally has really started moving up through our farm system the last few years. This year, he did very well in Class A Marathon. We promoted him to High A Ball, where he did have 10 homers and 101 at-bats. And then he finished the year in Double A Utica, where he hit just a $150 in an admittedly small sample size of 20 at-bats. But his home run power and his gap power are coming along well. He's got pretty solid range for an outfielder, good speed. The issue and concerns with Toledo continue to remain his ability to make contact, his fragility as far as his injury proneness, and then most significantly, his extreme tendency to strike out. And even in a year where he had 28 homers and 72 runs batted in across those 3 levels of the minor leagues, he still struck out a sickly 173 times in 369 at-bats. So we can't have a guy who's striking out in about half of his at-bats, which is kind of the pace he's at throughout his minor league career. It's actually even worse than that, with 594 career strikeouts in 1,089 at-bats. Just an insane lack of ability by him to make contact with the ball. Still hoping that that improves with the big investment that we do have in player development and coaching. Likely we'll be starting this upcoming year in Double A as a 22-year-old. And if things go well there and he's able to improve in his ability to avoid striking out, could see him in AAA, and maybe, if everything goes perfectly well, even in the majors next September. Arturo Casares, another international free agent signing from a couple years later in 2041, now viewed the number 18 prospect in baseball. He's almost as old as Toledo, 22 years old, even though we signed him a couple years later. had a monster year in rookie ball this year. He'll certainly be playing in A ball, high A ball, and possibly even double A next year. Hit 359 with 19 homers and 181 at bats, an incredible 200 WRC plus. He's a guy with pretty good speed, good bunter, really good outfield range. Could become a big part of our team in the not so distant future. Issues with him, as with a lot of prospects, are his eye and his ability to avoid strikeouts. We don't think he's ever going to draw too many walks, but hopefully he will strike out less and less as he gets more and more experience. But would expect him, now that we're going to promote him above the DSL, to probably make a very rapid rise through the organization next year. Danny Black, first round pick of ours in 2041. Spent the entire year in high A Jamestown, 10-14 record with a 5.12 ERA. He wasn't particularly good as a 21-year-old at that level. When I look at his ratings relative to the South Atlantic League, it's a bit surprising that he was so ineffective. He conceivably and most likely will start next year at Double A Utica, and hopefully will be able to help us in the majors down the line. Don't necessarily view him as a top of the rotation starter, but think he could still be a useful pitcher for us. Joey Bills is ranked as the 37th prospect in baseball. He's a guy that's worked out well for us, a 6th round pick from 2040, split last year between high A Jamestown, Double A Utica, and Triple A Albany. Wasn't dominant at any level. He was very good in Utica. But certainly has a profile that suggests he could be a useful mid to back end of the rotation type starter for us in the not so distant future. Another prospect, another starting pitcher, Eric Fisher, 2nd round pick in 2038. He's 24 years old. It's really kind of taken him a while to move up through the organization, but he did spend the entire year in Albany this year, 12-8 with a 3.59 ERA. Another guy who looks like he could be a useful right-handed arm in the bullpen and perhaps a 4th or 5th starter for us in the not so distant future. Two other top 100 prospects, Ezekiel Salazar, international free agent signing from 2042, hit just a $150 with 5 homers and 160 at-bats. He was basically 18 this year, which was his 2nd year in the DSL. So he's a relatively young prospect that we've pushed right into professional ball out of the international complex relatively early. Looking at his ratings relative to the DSL, it looks like he, should be producing it a much better than a 150 batting average. It's conceivable, since he'll only be 19 at the start of the year, that he'll begin the year in the DSL, but hopefully if he does well there, we'll promote him to A ball. But you can see he's got a lot of work to do to be a competent FSL hitter at this point. So it's also certainly possible he'll spend the whole year next year in the DSL. And then the final top 100 prospect, Jeff Frakowiak, was our 1st round pick back in 2039. Split this year between Double A Utica and Triple A Albany. 6-7 with a 3.87 ERA in Utica. Got up to Albany as was not good. 0-3 with a 7.47 ERA. He'll be 24 right when the next season begins. Kind of think he's a 5th starter, maybe a useful arm for the bullpen. Hasn't developed the way we would have hoped when we picked him in the 1st round, but still looks like he could be a useful pitcher for us going forward. In addition to the 8 top 100 prospects, we've got 5 prospects ranked between 101 and 200. David Tavera, a 17-year-old right fielder, was an international free agent signing earlier this year. He's still at the international complex. Could be possibly promoted next spring. Jim Coles, a 24-year-old 1st round pick in 2041, 13-9 with a 4.12 ERA in Albany, and then he was 2-0 with a 5.79 ERA in a very small sample size of 9 1/3 innings pitched in the majors, where he did give up 5 home runs. We'll hope that normalizes going forward with the Likely departures this offseason of Eric Barbarito and or Alexis Barajas. Coles is probably the most likely player to take one of their spots in the rotation. Caleb Kreveling, 18-year-old, who we took in the first round this year, 0-2 with a 6.10 ERA in a relatively small sample size of 31 rookie ball innings as an 18-year-old. Struck out 50 in those 31 innings, but also walked 30. Still looks like a high-end prospect if he fully develops, but he's got a lot of work to do before he'll be anywhere except rookie ball. R.E. Caper is a fourth-round pick from 2040. He split the year between High A Jamestown and Double A Utica, combined for a 16-3 record between those two levels with a ERA in the low threes, 4.7 WAR between those two levels. He'll be in Double A and likely Triple A this upcoming year. Issue with him is his control. His three-pitch arsenal is already pretty impressive. Kind of agree with the assessment that he's a borderline starter, may end up being more of a bullpen guy for us, but think he could be a useful pitcher for us in the not-so-distant future. And then our final top 200 prospect is Josh Fuchs. Picked him up in a trade with the Yankees this past offseason. He spent time in A, High A, and Double A for us before we promoted in September. We promoted him simply for his glove and wanted to get a good sense of how far his bat was away. The 28 WRC plus that he did put up in the majors told us what we kind of knew, that his bat was still pretty far away. Hopefully we'll get some good development out of him in Double A and hopefully Triple A next year. And we'll see him again in the majors, hopefully in September. The hope would be with his glove, if his bat does come along, that when we're thinking about opening day for the 2046 season, our hope is that Fuchs may be in the mix to be our starting shortstop then. Won't go through the rest of the prospects listed, just highlight a couple. You may remember John Wisniewski. He was a first-round reliever that we picked in 2041, which is a little rare for us. Split the year between rookie ball and A ball. He was good at both levels, but not exceptional at either level. Really need that second pitch, that cutter, to develop for him. And ultimately, he's going to need much better stuff and much better control to be successful at the major league level. But you look at the FSL that he was in, and he should be a pretty decent pitcher at that level. 21 years old, going to be turning 22 early next year. Certainly not a lost cause, but probably not someone who's going to be a dominant closer, which we were hoping a little bit when we picked him up. One final guy to mention, Juan Palomo, international free agent signing from 2038. Had a decent year for us at High A Jamestown this year. The batting average was only .254, but he did hit 27 homers and 452 at-bats. So when all was said and done, put up a 107 WRC+. His bat looks like it's going to be pretty borderline and marginal for a major leaguer, but he's a decent defensive player who can play a number of positions. Could certainly see him being in the mix to be a utility infielder for us in the next couple of years. And with the review of the top prospects in our farm system complete, we'll turn to some of the other more interesting prospects around baseball. Reagan Bursey and Pat Carmen are going to be interesting to check in on because those were the two players that were the centerpiece of the trade that we made for Josh Fuchs. Bursey 7-7 this year with a 4.50 ERA for High A Hudson Valley in the Yankees organization. Still looks like he could be a useful major league pitcher, and he also is a potential two-way guy who looks like he could be a borderline useful major league hitter as well. Don't see him being a huge prospect, but I think the Yankees were intrigued by his two-way abilities. Pat Carmen is a guy that we picked, I believe, in the first round a few years back. 24th overall in 2040, a year that we had one of the earlier picks of ours. He was 8-5 with a 3.48 ERA for High A Tampa. Another guy who looks like he could be a solid major league pitcher, but probably not a top of the rotation type of guy. Luis Centino, starting pitcher in the Reds organization, still hasn't made it out of rookie ball, but he's still not 20 years old. So although he's played 3 years in rookie ball at this point and never hit an ERA lower than 6.21, still certainly looks like he has some potential, but he's going to need to start developing some of those pitches to have a good chance of success in the majors. Phil Mullen, first round pick in 2041 by the Nashville Stars organization, split last year between rookie ball and A ball. Still looks like he could be a useful major league pitcher, but probably not a star. Jorge Rente, on the other hand, still looks like a pretty good pitcher. Split this year between AAA and the majors, 9-6 with a 3.75 in the majors for Montreal. And he looks like he could be a pretty good major league starter, lefty, for many years to come. Ernesto Zambrana remains a extremely high-end pitching prospect, and at 23 years old now, with his first full year in the majors complete, probably not really even considered a prospect anymore. Number 3 prospect in baseball. He was an international free agent signing almost 7 years ago, and he just led the National League with 198 and a third innings pitched and 266 strikeouts this past season. Thought he was a pretty interesting prospect when he was an international amateur free agent. No reason to think otherwise. Couple pitchers left. You may remember Jeremy Fraga, the knuckleballer that we looked at in the draft just last year. He's already up in Cleveland, was 1-2 with a 3.38 ERA, working out of the bullpen for the Guardians this year. I guess it's conceivable we ended up playing him in the World Series. Didn't realize he was on the team. Not sure if he was on their playoff roster or not. Looks like he was not on the playoff roster. So that explains why we didn't see him in the World Series. But always interesting to see how a knuckleballer does. And then Frank Ramos from Miami has become one of the top relievers in the game. Second round pick from 2040. He was a reliever we thought about in the first round, and I know that some of you thought we should have went with him in the first round, and he's certainly done nothing to suggest that he wouldn't have been a pretty good selection, despite the fact that he is a reliever. Pat Moody has become one of the top players in baseball. He was the 3rd pick overall in 2041 with the Kansas City Royals. He just led the American League in at-bats, hits, and ribbies. 339 average, 39 homers, and 145 ribbies, 7.9 WAR. Looks like he is going to be a monster for many years to come with his profile. Jafnel Cook, second round pick from 2042. Still hasn't made it out of rookie ball, but he did hit a little better in rookie ball this year with an 89 WRC+. Mike James is a guy who we thought was potentially an interesting two-way guy, really driven by his defensive skill more than his hitting skills, but he's 25 years old now, spent this year in A-ball. As a pitcher, he was 5-5 with a 4.71 ERA, and as a hitter, he hit 224, although he did have 22 homers and 425 at-bats. Ratings-wise, still looks like a pretty interesting defensive player who can play just about anywhere on the field except catcher at a reasonably high level. Just don't know that he's ever going to hit enough or be a good enough pitcher to make it all worthwhile. Brenton Burrill, you may remember we picked him up in a trade. He was with our organization shortly, and then we used him as the big gun to bring Mr. Reichert into our organization last year. Burrill, as we talked about a few episodes ago, ended up rupturing his MCL very early in the season, had just 19 at-bats in Class A. 24 years old now with low work ethic and low adaptability. He's going to be 25 by mid-May, and he's still got a fair amount of development that needs to happen. Think he could be following a similar path to our middle infielder, Mr. Contreras, another guy who has that low adaptability and work ethic combination, and just has seemed to never truly reach his potential. And Luis Zapata is already retired. This is a player who just played in rookie ball this past year, hit 265. Kind of an interesting decision that he just gave it up today, actually, and retired. He did have a bruised wrist, but I guess Mr. Zapata, who was 36th overall pick in the supplemental draft back in 2040, when we had supplemental picks in the same area and were considering him, has decided to do something different with his life, because he did put up a 158 WRC plus in rookie ball this year, but he has walked away and will be doing something else. And we've also got an interesting list of over a dozen of our former players to check in on and see how they're doing. Juan Estrada, the former two-way superstar for us, we saw him in, was it in the playoffs this year? Yeah, it was against the Nationals. 10-9 record, 4.36 ERA, still a pretty effective pitcher. And he also hit 283 this year with a 115 WRC plus. So he'll be 38 early next year, but still seems like a pretty productive player. Had some really good years for us in Buffalo as a two-way guy, but priced himself out of our organization eventually. Similar story with Alexis Mendoza. He was 10-4 with a NL best 2.41 ERA. And 5.3 strikeout to walk ratio this year with the San Francisco Giants. The 31-year-old making pretty good money there. He was kind of a second or third starter for us for many years, but with the development of Jim Lance and Mendoza in line for a big contract, we let him move on a couple years ago. Ali Ostendorf, 9-13 with a 3.95 ERA. He has had a solid career in the Atlanta organization, but probably not quite as good as we thought he would be when we picked him second overall many years ago. And David Rivera, who was the centerpiece of the trade that brought us Baril initially and ended up helping us bring Mr. Reichert when all was said and done. Had a weird year in Colorado, a 6-13 record. He did save 37 games, 80 strikeouts, but a 4.65 ERA. Wasn't a great season for him, especially compared to the way he pitched his 2 seasons in Buffalo. But he'll be back on the free agent market likely this year unless Colorado signs him over the next couple of weeks to an extension. Jorge Barrios, former catcher in our organization, looks like he's now more of a backup with Pittsburgh, even though he's only 29 years old. Hit 220 with 6 homers and 173 at-bats for them. Still drew 39 walks, so his on-base percentage was 143 points higher than his batting average. Helped him generate a 110 WRC+. Still a pretty useful offensive player and an acceptable defensive catcher. Not necessarily the greatest player in the clubhouse. Mitch Houlihan, former starting catcher for us, moved on to Seattle this year, and he hit 242 and 430 at-bats. This is a guy who had been a perennial 300 hitter through the first several years of his career. Very good defensive catcher, but in recent years, his batting average has started to kind of decline each year as he's gotten somewhat older, and soon to be 32-year-old who's wrecked physically. Don't know how much longer he'll be producing at a major league level. And Andres Medina, .200 batting average with 9 homers and 416 at-bats for Nashville, only a 63 WRC plus. Still put up a WAR of almost 1.5, driven by his really good catcher ability. But at 37 years old, Funky Cold Medina likely nearing the end of the road. There's also a number of interesting infielders and outfielders to check in on. Joe Edwards has kind of carved out a nice career for himself in Boston, but he hit just a .162 this year. He's good at drawing walks. He did draw 95 walks, so his on-base percentage was almost exactly twice as high as his batting average. And he still has a little pop in his bat with 13 home runs, but it still all added up to a 73 WRC plus, and he was below replacement level, making an awful lot of money. Looks like he is headed to free agency. Can't imagine he's going to be in a position to get a $22 million a year contract at this point. 36 years old soon, and really struggles to make contact. Arturo Flores, 263 average, but 39 homers and 96 ribbies as a member of the Yankees, a 140 WRC plus. Flores is a guy who, when we originally picked him up as an international amateur free agent, he was a big prospect and one of the top prospects in our organization throughout his minor league development. Always liked his captain personality, just as a relatively generic right-handed batter, not all that good defensively, not all that much speed. We perhaps undervalued his ultimate success as a home run hitter. You look at what he's done over the course of his career, 107 WRC plus, so he's been a slightly above average offensive player, but he's put up some pretty good counting statistics with 220 homers at this point at the age of 32. His 39 homers this year was a career high. He's done reasonably well away from us, but other than this year with the Yankees, he put up a 103 WRC plus in his 6 years with the Angels, which is exactly the same mark that he put up with us over the first 3 years of his career when he was more of a part-time player. If he keeps performing the way he did with the Yankees going forward, we'll regret that trade somewhat more, but nice to see him doing reasonably well at this point. Shamar Jenneret, who was a big part of our first 2 World Championship teams, looks like he is nearing the end. He defensively at this point, with 20s across the board as an infielder, is even worse than Deshaun Seifu defensively. He's not great in the outfield either. Wrecked physically, hit .255 with 10 homers and 365 at-bats. He's 39 years old. He's going to turn 40 on Christmas Day. Looks like he's still looking for one final contract. Look at what he's done over the course of his career, and he's 9 homers away from 500. Perhaps that's the reason he's thinking about coming back to maybe get those last 9 home runs, which would likely strengthen his potential case to be a Hall of Famer. He, of course, as I mentioned, was with us for our first 2 World Series championships. He was the MVP in both of those World Series championships, and the year we didn't win it, he was the National League MVP. Couple other players to visit. Steve Anderson was our longtime shortstop. Let him leave because he was in position to start making big money. Hit .252 with 25 doubles, 14 homers, and 68 ribbies, 88 WRC plus for Washington this year. He's definitely more of a third baseman than a shortstop at this point, but still a competent defensive infielder, making a lot of money, and he is also headed to free agency. So we're going to see a lot of these guys on the free agent market. Jim Andrews, along with Burrell, was a key reason we were able to get the Reichert trade done. We definitely took a downgrade as far as our defense at shortstop, moving on from Andrus this past offseason and putting Whitehead at short instead. Andrus, as far as his year with the Dodgers, hit 246 with 12 homers, 21 doubles. That's kind of a vintage Andrus season. His 90 WRC plus, a little worse than he did with us a year ago, but a little better than he did with us 2 years ago. 1.7 WAR, pretty useful player, but we felt like we could survive with Whitehead this year, and we ended up winning the World Series without Andrus, so I certainly don't have any complaints about that trade so far, given what we think Reichert is going to be, and the fact that we also have Fuchs, who we hope will be an even better defensive shortstop than Andrus in the not-so-distant future. Joe Gallagher, Mr. Navin Johnson, spent this year with Pittsburgh, and it was a Joe Gallagher season, a 197 average, 172 strikeouts are the negatives, 29 doubles, 22 home runs are the positives. It all added up to, though, a 84 WRC plus and a minus 1.4 WAR, given his defensive limitations and his unpleasant personality. And apparently he's angry now. For many reasons, the team record, his own performance, and the team chemistry. So Joe Gallagher continued to have a tough time functioning in normal society given his bad attitude. And last but not least, Mike Heiner spent this year in the minors, AA and AAA, and then he did get up to the majors briefly with the Las Vegas A's, where he did hit 333 with 5 homers and 18 ribbies in just 93 at-bats. But it looks like he ended up, I guess he must have gotten released at some point, because he's now in the Yankees organization with Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders, but doesn't look like he actually played there at all this year. So the Yankees signed, well, if they signed him on September 4th, unless they were in the playoffs, they were probably within the final couple days of the season. So interesting to see whether Heiner will get back to the majors more permanently. Hard to believe he's 35 years old right now. He was a Rookie of the Year for us just 11 years ago. He was an all-star in his first 2 seasons with us, and he was on both of our first 2 championship teams. We had signed him to a long-term contract that was pretty reasonable, but when it seemed like he wasn't going to be the player that he was those first couple of years, we did end up trading him away, and he's gone on to become a bit of a nomad over the past 4 or 5 seasons, splitting time between major league teams almost every year. And with that, it's time to start thinking about the future. In our next episode, we're going to begin the offseason in earnest. We've got some money to spend, but we're also in a situation where we're potentially losing our number 2 starter, Barajas, our number 3 starter, Barbarito, our first baseman, Daniel Rojas, who led the team in homers and ribbies, as well as Josh Porter, pretty solid outfielder who hit 312 with 11 homers and 45 ribbies for us in 260 at-bats this year. So although we've got money to spend, we do have some holes to fill. Certainly would think that I'm thinking that Barajas and Porter in particular are guys we might think about making an offer to over the next couple of weeks. Barbarito, I think it's a very small chance we make an offer to him. And Rojas is kind of in the middle ground. Pretty good batter, good in the clubhouse, and coming off of an incredibly productive season where he had a 157 WRC plus. But he's 38 years old, looking for another 3 years at around $25 million a year. Just don't know that I want to invest that much in an older player. As we think about arbitration, we're going to, if we don't re-sign these guys, submit qualifying offers to Barajas, Barbarito, and possibly Porter. It's kind of interesting that Deshaun Seifu at the age of 40, because we've had him locked up his entire career, never let him potentially hit free agency before, that he's eligible for a qualifying offer. But given that we just declined a $6 million team option on him, and we're still waiting for some final votes on whether we should keep him and bring him back or retire him, we're certainly not going to be offering him $19 million, though. He's only looking for a little over $2 million a year for 3 years with a vesting option that I think it's very unlikely he would achieve. If we do decide to bring him back, would be looking to pay him a bit less than that. And as we've talked about extensively right now, view him as a part-time player playing as our designated hitter and leadoff hitter against left-handed pitching only, but would like to have him on the team as a pinch runner and for his captain personality, and to potentially see if he could get to 700 doubles and 200 triples, 1,300 steals, and 3,200 hits next year. A lot of benchmark numbers in his sights. If he played a decent amount, there's also a chance of him getting to 1,800 runs scored. I don't think any of this, whether he retires or comes back as a platoon player for another year or two, is ultimately going to have a big impact on his Hall of Fame case. It's really just a matter of the timing of when he's first voted on, and we see whether he is a shoo-in, someone who has no chance, or someone who will need to wait a couple years before getting in. So we've got decisions to make on Seifu as well. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, several days for you to make comments to this episode and share your thoughts with me. And when I am back at home, we'll be getting into the offseason in earnest. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.